There's only one great occupation that can change the world. That's real rock and roll. I believe to the bottom of my heart, the last cell, that rock and roll can change everything. And I'm a graduate of Warhol University. And I believe in the power of punk. To this day, I want to blow it up.
The spires of New York rose into the sky. Who could ever describe the impact of this colossus of stone and steel? They say tourists must always look up, but golly, you feel small when you do. Especially when it's the Empire State, tallest building in the world.
New York was the place. It was like a beacon. It wasn't just a place that tolerated you. It was a big enough city. The famous tagline of the TV series, The Naked City. There are 8 million stories in the naked city. Well, you can fit into a place where there's 8 million people.
New York's one of those places, almost like you could take the continental United States. You can shake it to the right, and all the misfits roll into New York City.
New York had always been, because it was the port of entry for immigrants, so the new always came to New York. I mean, and I always said when I was younger that America will be like what New York is like now in 10 years, because everything happened in New York first. And New York was just it. Think of Frank Sinatra singing New York, New York. If I can make it there, I can make it anywhere. And that was the thing. Go to New York, you'll fit in, because there are other people like you, no matter how you're like.
Lou Reed moved to New York in 1964, and he just fell in love with the right crowd. He discovered the Brill Building and all the rock and roll songwriters that they had in New York. He discovered an industry. He discovered a place which at that time had a multiplicity of places he could play rock and roll. The Velvet Underground came out. It was the key axis was Lou Reed meeting John Cale, and it's funny because although John Cale was Welsh, he certainly wasn't even American, much less a New Yorker. He was over in New York studying music, and he was classically trained. I mean, John Cale could sit down and play you a Bach concerto or whatever you have, and Lou Reed was at best a wonderfully gifted, if primitive, guitar player, sort of a self-taught guy. So they're sort of an odd pairing, but when you got those two together, it's yin and yang, light and dark, black and white, sparks fly.
Well, we just met down in the Village where I was doing songwriting for a company. They would put us in a room and say, write 10 California songs, 10 Detroit songs. And John walked in, and we decided it'd be much better to go play and have fun.
At one of their very, very earliest gigs is an example of what Lou Reed's going through in Manhattan. Him and Cale and the Velvet Underground of the day, they weren't the fully formed band yet. They were the precursor to it, shall we say. They had a guy named Angus McLeese on drums, and he was late for the gig by half hour, and I think they had to play like 45 or 50 minutes. So they'd started the set, and McLeese just came on and started doing the percussion some 30 minutes into the set. As they got to the end of the set, Reed and Cale finished playing their instruments and bowed and walked off. But McLeese, to make up for the 30 minutes late, stayed on stage and kept pounding away the percussion to make up, as I said, for his 30 minutes late. To you and I might seem incredibly bizarre, but to Cale and Reed, they thought that was fantastic. That story right there encapsulates the new scene that Lou Reed's in when he's in Manhattan.
When you are not a big grossing act, there's not a lot of money coming in. Membership of bands is very fluid. People go in and out, and looking back, you want to have one of Pete Frame's old tree diagrams of, well, okay, this one came here and that one came there. But at the time, since there was not much money to worry about, you didn't care how the spoils were divided, you just played with somebody else. And it's just a matter of circumstance that the famous four of the Velvet Underground came together. Lou was the prime mover because he was a singer and the major songwriter. And his guitar work became distinctive. So he was the major figure in that group.
I mean, arguably, some people say the Velvet Underground is to a large extent the sound of your voice, to an extent, and your lyrics. Are you saying there's an absolute distinction between Lou Reed and Velvet Underground?
I thought I knew what I was saying, but if I listen to you much more, maybe I won't.
He's a figure that can only be understood if you try to understand the setting in which he lived, because otherwise the work seems very self-indulgent.
Have you ever met Miss Lindy? She's a gal with the bright red hair. Now she stands high from all the rest. You know her anywhere. Well, she's mine. Yeah, she's mine. Well, I love that little girl with the bright red hair. Well, Miss Lindy, my Miss Lindy. Well, I love that little girl. She's so fine. Well, Miss Lindy, my Miss Lindy. Well, I love that little girl with the bright red hair.
Lou Reed was raised in Long Island, and he had what most people would think from the outside is a loving suburban family with a father that ran an accountancy firm. But he was just a misfit. He never fit in. It's one of the key stories of popular music post-World War II and perhaps before World War II. Misfits that don't fit in. A seemingly loving family from the outside, but they don't understand why their son or why their daughter is this way. And Lou Reed was that to the nth degree.
I have to say, the early life of Lou Reed doesn't sound like much fun. His grandparents were Russian emigres, Jews seeking safety in America. And he didn't get on with his parents very well. As a matter of fact, notoriously, because when he had periods of depression as a teenager, they don't appear to have been entirely sympathetic and forced him to have ECT, electroconvulsive therapy.
It ruined his short-term memory. And of course, he resented his parents for some time after that.
He had a bit of a combative reaction to them, but you know, combat at that time wasn't violent. It was inner. And he suffered himself depression, periods of depression, and the early use of drugs. And he would have had his early homosexual experiences at a time when being homosexual was really tough.
I'd like to begin with a fact, a simple yet shocking fact. It is this: a flood tide of filth is engulfing our country in the form of newsstand obscenity.
It's very hard for people to understand today that the very word homosexual had almost entirely negative connotations.
It is threatening to pervert an entire generation of our American children. We know that once a person is perverted, it is practically impossible for that person to adjust to normal attitudes in regard to sex.
Lou Reed, when he started having same-sex relationships, they would have been called homosexual relationships, and thus automatically been looked upon by the non-homosexual world in a pejorative way.
These magazines with a homosexual viewpoint and poses are often not understood by many youngsters who take them as instruction of body development. But psychiatrists believe that prolonged exposure of even the normal male adult to this type of publication, though he may not be aware of its true nature, will nevertheless pervert.
The New York Times had a front page story, "Who are the homosexuals?" And a full page inside about how they were doomed to be unhappy because they could never have lasting relationships and never have children.
Think then of the consequences to the inexperienced youth who, in purchasing and studying this material, becomes a pawn for these misfits.
So it was a very complex, deeply affecting childhood, to say the least. We're all the products of our childhood, but more so Lou Reed and the troubles he had growing up.
Being accepting of ourselves is certainly a great asset. And the process of personal self-liberation is a major issue for all people, and particularly for gay people.
Lou Reed used to listen to the radio as a young man. Like a lot of people are alienated. You look for something where you can fit in. As a young man, he would spin the New York stations on the AM dial from left to right. The 50s rolled on. Lou Reed became influenced by guys like Carl Perkins and Eddie Cochran, who played the guitar, and he became an electric guitar aficionado. So by the time the Beatles and the Stones rolled around in the early 60s, he'd already done the fraternity parties and the high school parties, and was a fairly seasoned performer.
Lou would have been drawn to the Andy Warhol world because he was in New York, and the factory of Andy Warhol was a place for misfits, people who would not have been accepted in mainstream society.
And it was a place where people went every day. Warhol did his work there, and sometimes Warhol and his minions, you know, Gerald Malanga and the Edie Sedgwick crowd, just sort of hung out there.
Oh, this is so glamorous.
Andy Warhol was from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, a very unlikely town to have begotten one of America's greatest artists of all time. Warhol was a man that understood, in the way that Miles Davis and the great jazzers understand, it's not what you play, it's what you don't play. And sometimes there's silence that's required to make a good song or a good solo. Warhol was a bit like that in the arts. He understood that repetition and the absence of repetition, and then doing something new, and then doing something you've done before, they're all part of a pattern. He wasn't a guy that just continually did new and provocative things. He did what the moment required.
We look back now and think Andy Warhol, the artist of the 60s. But at the time, he was categorized. In other words, he wasn't considered mainstream. Mainstream was still painters. Even if they'd gone modern art like Jackson Pollock, The idea of someone like Andy silk screening, selling multiple prints of the same work, using pop culture subject material. This was considered a bit tacky, déclassé. And he was first famous for the soup cans. So it's hard to take seriously someone who's making paintings or silk screens of Campbell's soup. Everybody knew him, but basically because he was so shocking. How dare a guy do a poster of Mao Zedong or Jackie? You know, this is not. The real art is Rembrandt with Aristotle contemplating the bust of Homer. Now that's art. Well, of course, everything flipped. And almost no great young artist was doing painting by the end of the 60s. Okay, obviously there are a couple of exceptions, but pop had taken over. The world had been popped by the tastes of the young. And Andy happened to be right place, right time. He was the front runner. People flocked to him. He was doing a lot. There was a lot to do. He was making these movies, which became notorious because they were both boundary bursting and not very good.
Then we're going to do a strip poker movie where there'll be, I think, 4 girls and 3 boys playing strip poker.
When you are so big in your own area that you are known to everybody, even by the people who don't like you, that's a wild kind of stardom, and Andy Warhol had that kind of stardom. So it amused him to expand his operations. Oh, let's see what else I can get off the ground here.
And he was taken to see the Velvet Underground at the Dome, and he fell in love with them right there, then and there on the spot.
We're sponsoring a new band. It's called the Velvet Underground.
What sort of thing do you intend to do with the band? Could you talk about that?
Well, it would be the biggest discotheque in the world.
And so he put on these events with the Velvet Underground playing. And he asked them if they would incorporate Nico, who was this German female vocalist. And so they did.
To do that was actually a very good idea because she brought in a lot of influences that now dominate a certain strain of popular music. She brought in this cold, Germanic, Teutonic, mid-European way of singing it's the opposite of, say, Otis Redding and Janis Joplin and American singers where you just put your heart into the lyric and you're screaming. It's a very, I'm going to sing like this. It's the opposite of that. So it was actually a very clever idea, but to do that, she's going to have to take over some of the singing in the Velvet Underground. It means Lou Reed's not going to sing some of his songs. He's not going to sing I'll Be Your Mirror. He's not going to sing Femme Fatale, so on and so forth. And so Reed, irony of ironies, was against Nico joining the Velvet Underground initially.
That's why it's called the Velvet Underground and Nico. It's almost as if she's an afterthought. They don't want to admit that she's part of the group because she's been forced on them by Andy. But on that first album, she certainly fit in. My first encounter with the Velvet Underground album was peeling off the banana peel because the original copies had the peel off bananas. But you put it on and Sunday Morning is of course a beautiful song, but there are a lot of beautiful songs.
The Velvet Underground and Nico didn't sell well when it came out, even though this first album is a classic, the so-called Banana Peel album. It's a terrific album. Everyone and their brother agrees it's a classic album. There's no question about that. It's got great song after great song on it. But it's way too far forward for the times, for that sort of 67 Monterey pop, flowers in your hair, mamas and papas, everybody's sort of high and spiffy and hugging each other when they meet each other. That's just not the Velvet Underground's time. It's just not time for the Velvet Underground with these almost industrial, repetitive, grinding songs. They're completely out of whack with the Summer of Love.
These songs were not going to get onto top 40 radio. And top 40 radio, until the very late 60s, was the main form of pop music being broadcast. There was very little opportunity for artists like the Velvet Underground to be heard at all. And remember, no internet, no social media. So unless you had a friend play you the record, and then you might order it from your record store, because they probably wouldn't be stocking it to begin with because there wasn't enough demand. So everyone who bought the Velvet Underground albums had to try to find them. And I think of Brian Eno's famous quote that only 30,000 people bought the Velvet Underground and Nico album, but they all started bands, and thus drastically changed the course of popular music.
One of the problems when you have a manager more famous than you is you have a manager more famous than you. Warhol was already a name by the mid-1960s, and the Velvet Underground, by the end of the 1960s, weren't much of a name. They were discovered later, as we all know, during the 70s and the rise of punk in the late 70s, and appreciated more and more as the decades rolled on. At the time, Andy Warhol's fame would have dwarfed that of Lou Reed and the various members of the Velvet Underground. So in a way, it was a bit of a problem. I think the downfall of Lou Reed and Andy Warhol's relationship, part of it is Lou Reed's not getting the acclaim that he thinks he should get. It all combined to just create someone's got to give. And Lou Reed's headstrong. We see it time and time again in his career. He's headstrong. He does not compromise. He's I don't want to say baby, but he is a my way or the highway kind of guy.
It's only in retrospect that it seems like a shocking thing. Lou Reed would have fired him because he was unreliable, and probably because they weren't making enough money. I mean, those are the two reasons why an artist gets mad at a record company or manager. But of course, nobody was going to do a better job because nobody had the access to creative outlets as Andy did.
It's wrong to judge anybody by their looks, but Nico is so attractive and so erotic and sexy and European and sophisticated and urbane that men were falling in love with her right, left, and center, including guys like Lou Reed and John Cale. It's not good that she's on the scene. So when she left, there's X amount of tension in the band that's gone. I know Maureen Tucker, their drummer, said it was better after she left. There was in the band a sense of now we can breathe again. And they became more of a rootin' tootin' gang. And of course, I'm not to say that things are lovey-dovey, hunky-dory after Nico left. I have a theory that one reason the schism developed with Reed and John Cale. I think part of it is you have creative minds that have slightly different ways of going about. But Cale presents an idea and wants you to accept it. Lou Reed says this is how it's going to be. When Lou Reed starts battling with Cale, it's hindsight is 2020, but one can see that once they start butting heads, the great Lou Reed and the great John Cale, something's got to give. And Lou Reed's not a compromise guy. He doesn't compromise. So at a delicatessen or a restaurant, Lou Reed calls a meeting and tells Sterling Morrison and Mo Tucker John Cale's got to go. And they're aghast. For those that don't know a heck of a lot about the Velvet Underground, let me put it to you this way. It is John Lennon calling a meeting and telling Ringo and George that McCartney's got to go. It is Mick Jagger calling a meeting and telling the Stones that Keith Richards has got to go. You're losing, at the very least, a second in command, which is belittling to Cale. I'm sorry to use that phrase, but you're losing at least the greatest second in command that a rock band could have. The band by summer 1970 was playing small gigs. There weren't a lot of places they could tour anymore. They did well in Cleveland, of all places. They did well in the upper Midwest, Detroit, but they weren't the kind of band that could tour San Antonio, Atlanta, Denver. They weren't universally acclaimed. None of the 4 albums sold. In fact, the 4th album, Lou Reed admitted, Loaded, was an attempt to get on the radio, to sell some records and get some form of popularity.
And one fine morning she put on a New York station. She didn't believe what she heard at all. She started dancing to that fine, fine music. You know her life was saved by rock and roll.
I guess when you're just frustrated, you want to change, and people might say, well, the Velvet Underground was a great group. But if you have 3 very low-selling albums, and one of them doesn't get released until the group is over, you're going to think, oh, well, maybe it's not meant to be, maybe I should be a solo artist. I mean, it would have been really sad if Lou Reed had just tried to make the Velvet Underground and Nico over and over again. But it could only happen once, and we're just glad it happened. I find it very strange that Lou Reed's first 3 solo albums were recorded in London, because you would have thought they would have to have been recorded in New York City. But they weren't. He loved England, and he wasn't considered a freak here. He recorded his first solo album in Northwest London, in a studio I've been in, and which I associated with R&B stars. But nonetheless, this was where he felt comfortable, and he used a couple of famous British musicians on it.
He had songs that the Velvets had demoed and fooled around with in the rehearsal studio for the 5th album, which they never made. So his first album, Lou Reed, had a lot of those songs on it, and it's a good record, but it's down. It's quiet. It's not as confrontational or as edgy or as blistering as one thinks a Lou Reed solo album should be. I think Lou Reed had a gut check after that first album, which is a good album. There's no question. It's got a lot of good songs on it. But the second album, Transformer, something about it, from the cover with the overexposed shot of Reed, which they were going to throw out, and he said, "No, we've got to use that one. That's the one." To the sessions themselves, it had a bit of fairy dust sprinkled all over it. Now, I'm not sure exactly what the components were to create that, but it definitely has some fairy dust sprinkled on it. He comes out with stuff like Satellite of Love and Walk on the Wild Side, his best tunes since maybe the first Velvet Underground album. And the production of it was radio friendly without being overtly so.
In the back room, she was everybody's darling. But she never lost her head. Even when she was giving head, she says, "Hey babe, take a walk on the wild side." Said, "Hey babe, take a walk on the wild side." And the colored girls go do 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 do.
He was so fortunate and so lucky. By this, I mean, here's an example. Walk on the Wild Side has overt references to sex, but both the record label, RCA, didn't know what he was singing, and the FM DJs in America didn't care. So it was played in my youth all the time on radio in the United States, and we were all giggling because kids at high school and university, they understand what Reed's singing about. But the programmers at radio either didn't know or didn't care, and his record label didn't care. I remember reading in Rolling Stone magazine an article about how astonishing is this that it's on the radio now.
So it slipped right on in there. And the same in America. It became a top 20 hit. And it actually is a major record. These are songs which are of the quality. Has a come down. And of course, after Transformer, he had Berlin, which although it got to number 7 in the British album chart, and I remember thinking, whoa, that's pretty good. But it pretty much bombed in America.
Berlin was considered just too much for the public after the success of Transformer. It didn't do as well. Now, like so many of these things, it's considered a classic.
He was always worth listening to, even if you didn't like it at all. And here I must bring in Metal Machine Music. Now, for those who don't know, Metal Machine Music was a double album, 4 sides of tone, slightly fluctuating tone.
People say, "What did you think of Metal Machine Music?" I said, "Well, I got through about 8 minutes. And then every once in a while, I'll try side 2 or side 3, and I get through 4 to 5 minutes. It's so challenging. It's so grating. I never decided if it's Lou Reed giving 2 fingers, or in America, 1 middle finger to his audience, or if it really is his idea of an artistic challenge. It's unbelievable.
I was in love with the feedback from guitars. And I was living in a loft where I had all the instruments and the amplifiers. And I had found a tuning that I liked, and I liked to put the guitar lean it against the amplifier, and it would play itself.
I think in many ways, when an artist does yin, they do yang. And I think Coney Island Baby, an underrated album by him, I think that's him coming back down to earth and realizing, you know, you can't, or maybe someone at RCA grabbed him by the lapels and said, listen, buddy, Coney Island Baby is Reed sensitive for him, melodic vocals. He always had a bit of that FM DJ. He's talking to you like this. He's sort of speaking and singing at the same time. Well, on Coney Island Baby, he starts to sing, and there's warmth in his songs on Coney Island Baby. When he starts talking about his past and what happened to him in high school and how he did try, and he lets down his guard and lets you know on Coney Island Baby that he did want to fit in. He did want to have friends at school, and that's more the Lou Reed that I think the public and indeed myself are comfortable with, because there's something about a tough guy who's always got his guard up that suddenly realizes it's time to put the guard down and let somebody inside. And I think it was a period where Reed was more, I don't know, for whatever reason, he was making more, you can't say conventional with Lou Reed, but relative to Lou Reed's past, he was making more conventional rock albums.
And me, I'm in a rock and roll band. Huh.
1, 2, 3, 4.
This is a garage band that always had, by its own admission, a faintly amateurish sound. At the collective age of 200, this is their first ever European tour. And Lou Reed is playing alongside John Cale 25 years after he kicked him out of the band.
We're gonna have a real good time together.
We were all in attendance at a Warhol exhibition at the Cartier Foundation had in Paris. And John and I were there doing a little part of a piece called Songs for Drella. And Maureen and Sterling were there, and we all played together impromptu.
Mm-hmm.
Very impromptu. And we had a lot of fun.
I think a bridge too far was when they had the Velvet Underground reunion, which everybody and his brother on the indie scene of independent music, alternative music worldwide was so excited about. After the first gig in Scotland, I remember speaking to a friend of mine who attended, and he said it wasn't good. It was like a Lou Reed band backing up Lou Reed, and it wasn't what it should have been. It wasn't noisy and disgusting and out there and edgy and pushy. And I guess you can't go home again. There's that Liverpudlian saying, you can't boil your cabbages twice. Maybe they were trying to boil the cabbages twice. But it was too much focus on Reed. And you've got Cale there. I mean, Cale is in his own right. Give the man his due. From his solo albums to his work with Lou Reed earlier, Cale is a genius. Cale is a complete bright spark. You got a bright spark trying to light the match. Don't pour water on the guy. And it never really took off. They famously played Glastonbury in, I think, 1994 on the big stage, significantly enough, not at the headlining hour. I think it was late afternoon. And I got closer and closer to the stage. I was playing there on a different stage, and I got closer and closer. I was listening. And I have to say this out loud, it just wasn't what it should have been. I heard like 3 or 4 songs. I thought, I don't need to see this. It was just, it wasn't that it was bad. It wasn't that it was lifeless. It just wasn't challenging. So I heard several songs and I thought, no. And I just went back and missed it the rest of the show. So one of the things that really scuppered the reunion is they were going to do an Unplugged. Now, I think that lower key version of the Velvet Underground that I saw or heard at Glastonbury, I think it would have been perfect for an MTV Unplugged. People playing that sort of aloof, slightly detached music about challenging subjects, as the Velvet Underground did, would have been perfect for MTV Unplugged. Alas, when they saw the songs that Lou wanted to play at MTV Unplugged, and the other 3, Sterling Morrison, Mo Tucker, and John Cale, they realized this is really going to be a show about Lou Reed way weighted in Lou's corner, more than it is to the other 3 of us. And words were exchanged, and Lou said, okay, once again, like when he got rid of Nico, like when he got rid of Cale, it's my way or the highway, and the whole thing fell apart. And the Velvet Underground reunion ended before it really started, which is a shame, because it's that album he did with Cale. They did just a duet album, just the 2 of them, with no backing musicians, called Songs for Drella, which is about Andy Warhol. He was Drella. It's a terrific record. So they were capable late in the day, Cale and Reed, of forming a union and having a really great artistic role. But man, not doing that MTV Unplugged and not doing the dates in the United States because Reed was so adamant that it's his way or the highway. It's just a tragedy, really a missed opportunity.
Lou Reed was an outstanding songwriter and almost a standard bearer for the counterculture. But he was such an unintentional revolutionary. This is what strikes me. I'm sure that he would have been a conventional pop star if he could have been. But he just didn't have that. And then it's almost by accident, I think, that he became a part of Andy Warhol's scene. And of course, it was a scene, so it was happening. And within that world, he became incredibly popular. It's a fascinating example of a man who lived on a day-to-day basis, one foot in front of the other, and his journey took him to places where no one else had been before, and suddenly he's an icon.
There was something that Lou started when he did his stuff, which was that kind of punk ethic that he still held true to himself. To the end,